Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Aleks Svetski. Aleks, welcome.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for having me on despite me being not in the greatest condition.
Oh, it's like I said before we started recording, I'm sorry to hear about the accident, but I'm sure you can go into it if you'd like to. But would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, well, other than crashing my motorbike in the jungle, what I generally do with my time is it's basically split between three things primarily. I run a tech company in Australia, which is a Bitcoin accumulation app, and really simply speaking, is Bitcoin's the only way for people to genuinely protect their wealth in this modern day and age of inflation, of exorbitant taxation, of all sorts of crazy shenanigans that are appearing all over the world, based on or sort of emerging from the incompetence of central planners, central bankers, governments, all this sort of stuff. So we want to help enable people to move their wealth out of dollars and fiat currency and into Bitcoin. So that's sort of where my core focus is, and that's the core business. And then at the periphery of that, I actually run my own little podcast called the Wake Up Podcast, and we've had some very interesting guests on there. One of your country's people, so a guy called Zuby, he's a relatively well-known rapper and author and things like that. So he was on the show a little while ago. And then on the other side of that periphery, I do a lot of writing. So I blend themes from philosophy, psychology, anthropology, and economics into helping better navigate and understand how natural order functions, how the world functions, and better ways to live, I guess, for lack of a better term.
So it's non-fiction writing. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's too much stupidity that happens in my normal life for me to have to resort to writing fiction. I think half my stories are basically feel and sound fictional, almost.
Well, that's one of the things that I would like to go through with you, because when you got in touch and I looked through your bio and everything that you're doing, the first thing that stands out to me is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is just entrepreneur. So you got loads of stuff going on, very busy, very, should we say, self-motivated. Do you think that that's an accurate description?
Yeah, ever since I was young, and I guess my entrepreneurial story started a little bit violently is probably not the word, but it's sort of along those lines. Is I was at university studying civil engineering. I did really well academically in school, and I got a bunch of scholarships offered to me by a bunch of different universities, and I obviously picked the one that was on the beach because I thought that was cool. That's what you do as an 18-year-old kid. And when I got there, I was always top of all my classes, but I felt like I was surrounded by people who just, I'd ask them the question of, so, what are you doing here at uni? And they're like, I don't know, I got nothing better to do. I was like, really? Like, you're going to spend the rest of your life potentially doing this job, or having this career, and you don't know why you're here. And it was just very disillusioning for me. So I found myself doing all sorts of extracurricular activities. So I started teaching myself about the stock market, how things work, what options are, what warrants are, derivative products. And this is sort of back in 2006, 2007, long before things like Robinhood or any of that sort of stuff existed. And yeah, I taught myself to trade markets. I took my scholarship money, and instead of buying textbooks and things like that, I went and traded the market, and I turned a couple $1,000s into almost $50,000 or $60,000. And I thought I was a genius. I thought I knew everything. And then the pre-GFC tremors, so sort of late 2007 was when things started to fall apart, and I lost everything that I'd made, and then I borrowed a bunch of money, and then I lost that, and my whole dream to be a millionaire by the time I was 20 went the opposite direction, and I started off my 20s about $250,000 in debt. And that was the driver for me to really, I had to drop out of uni and I had to go and figure out a way to earn this bloody money back. Otherwise, I couldn't eat. And yeah, my life's been one sort of progression from there. And, from there, I dug myself out by, initially knocking on doors, selling pay television, and then growing my own sales company. And then by the time I think I was 22, 23, I dug myself out of that, made my first million. And, then the history beyond that has been very tumultuous. But that's sort of, to your question, self-motivated, very much so. It's sort of been ingrained in me. And then life events have transpired, probably, not only just from quote unquote bad luck, but also my self-motivation being turning into overzealousness in a sense. So when I was younger, I was always about self-motivation, but the older I've become, the more I've said, look, yes, you need that self-motivation, but you also need to temper it with some sort of wisdom. And that's what I lacked when I was younger, which is I just went all guns blazing. And when I made a mistake, things blew up. And then, what got me into trouble was my self-motivation, but it also got me out of trouble. So net positive, but I think the older I've gotten is, you need to sort of temper it with a level of wisdom and a level of prudence, I think.
So coming back briefly to when you were speaking to other people in your university and you had, I don't know how you describe it, perhaps a self-knowledge maybe, and ambition. Where do you think that comes from?
This was, I guess this is a deep conversation around nurture versus nature, right? Is like, are people born with this sort of ingrained desire to want to be better, to do better, and, some people not? Versus, is it your circumstances, the way you grew up, the way your parents treated you, the environment in which you, I guess, ingrained your initial values as a human being? Is that more important? And I don't think anyone really has an answer to that. But, I kind of err to the side of, I think it's a mixture of nature and nurture. I think the mental model I would use is kind of like your nature is like where the bookshelves are, and that's sort of fixed. But the nurture is where you decide to place the books on the bookshelf. So you'll have these sort of natural grooves and these natural strengths and these predilections or predispositions that you're born with. But beyond that, I think everything is up to you to sort of define. And I guess I probably had some sort of nature that was, a little bit maybe renegade-ish, or a little bit like I was always naturally intelligent, for example. So when I went to school, I aced everything when I was young. So I had this natural tendency to want to excel. Now that could have also been a case of my dad. Like my dad was very, 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 very tough on us as kids. He beat the crap out of us, all this sort of stuff, always pushed us to like sort of, and when I say us, me and my brother, I had a brother who's a year younger than me, pushed us to do things and to like be the best at what we do and all this sort of stuff. But I guess, that sort of drove me and my brother to want to excel. But what's really interesting, and this is where I believe in the nature side of things, is me and my brother run two very different lives. And whilst we both have this desire and this need to excel or to overachieve, the way it manifests is quite different. Mine manifests more in an entrepreneurial responsibility type thing. My brother's is more of a selfish kind of, I want the best for me and everybody else kind of thing. So it's a really interesting diversion. So I don't know if that answers it, but yeah, it's like I think that those seeds, like nature definitely, and then I think important seeds planted along the way that I guess helped make me view the world differently to others.
Did you have any business owner models that you could sort of look at and say?
Nah, see, this is where I think I made a lot of mistakes, is that I didn't really have a mentor. When I left home at 18, so I didn't have any mentors or business owners that could sort of guide me or anything. So the best thing I really had was books. And I've been a bookworm for many, many years. I think I've probably read close to 500 or 600 books over the last 10, 15 years. And I mean, in the early days, my heroes were people like Richard Branson and Howard Hughes and stuff like that. So I would look at their stories, and their stories were crazy. They were complete renegades. And I adopted a lot of that kind of call it methodology, or that sort of, that inspired me most. So I became kind of like that sort of renegade, which, like I said, got me in trouble a lot, but yes, in some ways has yielded some sort of result, I guess.
Mm. So how do you think you ended up, or what were the seeds which led you to start wanting to trade?
The trade one was interesting. So I think I can probably pinpoint it back to when I was 16. I won some, I don't know, competition at school where they gave a bunch of book vouchers out, and there was this kind of esoteric bookshop in town. So there was the normal bookshop which sold normal stuff, and then there was this like weird bookshop that sold things like spiritual growth, about philosophy, about personal development, all this sort of stuff. So obviously went in there, being just a curious young kid, and I picked up two books. I picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I picked up The Power of the Subconscious Mind by, I think his name was Joseph Murphy or Joseph Campbell, something. It was one of the early books written on that. I think it was written back in like the 80s or something, before that was much of a trend. And those two books planted, I think, some important, particularly Rich Dad Poor Dad planted, the EBSI triangle, so you're employed, self-employed, business owner, investor. And for me, the investor thing, kind of sounded like it made sense. And, my dad had bought some Telstra shares, and Telstra sort of like the telco in Australia that, was the traditional national telco, which then privatized later and things like that. And I just started reading online. I was like, what are shares? And I started sort of trying to figure this out. I started paper trading on ASX.com, which is the equivalent of FTSE. And, it seemed like I kind of could figure out what I was doing. And then from there, when I went to uni, I one day decided to go to a stockbroker. And this is sort of like, these days, no one goes to a stockbroker anymore. Like, this idea of going into someone's office and asking them to literally buy the shares for you over the phone, that doesn't exist anymore. These days, we have apps for that. Back then I walk into this stockbroker's office and I start talking about, this is what I want to do, blah, blah, blah. And he recommends to me this biotech stock. And, I take a bunch of my scholarship money and put it on this biotech stock. And it starts to crash. What is going on here? And I held it there for 3 months, and I finally got angry enough that I was like, look, man, this was the worst recommendation ever. And he's like, yeah, well, he goes, I'm a broker, I'm not an advisor. It's up to you to make a decision on this stuff. So I pulled my money out of there and I was like, man, I can do this better myself. And this was sort of when the first online trading platform started to rise up. And I just put my money on there. I started buying some small shares. And then I discovered this thing called options and warrants, which are basically derivative products that sit on top. They're contracts that effectively relate to the underlying instrument, to the share itself. And the beauty, but the danger of them is they're highly leveraged, which means, for a small movement in the underlying instrument, you get a significant movement up or down in the contract, in the option. So because I had a little bit of money, I was like, I'll do this. And, I was looking back on it now. I mean, I would slap the crap out of me, honestly, because I was blindly gambling. Honestly, I thought I knew what I was doing, but I was genuinely gambling. I had no idea, mate. I was just picking things and like trying to, I was basically momentum trading with options. And I mean, I learned the lesson.
So if you had like a family member and they were about to do exactly what you were about to do, what would you say to them?
I would slap them, which is what my uncle tried to do with me. I would simply tell them, like, particularly nowadays, like it's also different. Back then, there might have been some edge to gain through technical analysis, things like that. But right now, there is absolutely no edge to be made from a retail investor trying to compete against hedge funds and all the basically robotic algo-driven trading that happens on the market. Like whoever tells you that they think they can beat the market on a consistent basis is a liar or is deranged. Like there is absolutely no way. So these days, the best thing to do is to find something with asymmetric upside and to put a small amount aside every week. Simple as that. And if I had only done that, for example, with Amazon, starting in 2007, 2008, mate, I'd be a multi-millionaire by now if I just did $10 a week into Amazon every week for the last 13 years. But I decided to be Captain Fantastic and trade and beat the market and all this sort of stuff. And I mean, there was periods where I made a lot of money. There was periods I lost everything. And I think out of all the years that I've traded, probably 10 years in there that I actively traded different instruments. Like I made a bunch of money out of gold and silver in 2011, 2012 as the central banks all started to print money after the GFC. I made a killing, but then I lost a bunch of money again. And it's like sort of, if I look at all my life, I've probably been net square or maybe up a little bit in terms of overall position. When all I had to do was just put $10 a week aside into Amazon and actually do something that I'm good at and generate income by inputting value into society. I build a business, be an engineer, do like if I did that, I'd be so much better off. So if I had a family member now, I'd be like asking them seriously, what is it that you enjoy doing that you believe will add some value in society or to someone else's life that they'd be willing to trade you their time and energy for, in other words, their money? Do that. And then whatever surplus you have from that, you save and you put a little bit aside as an investment. That is the strategy. It's been the strategy from day dawn, and it'll always continue to be the strategy. But we're suckered into these ideas of, riches and everything like that from, being able to trade and all this sort of stuff. It's just blind gambling. You've actually got better odds in Vegas. So I would never recommend it.
So you're, as a result of the trading, you are now in a significant amount of debt. What are the thoughts going through your head once that's sort of settled? What does day one look like for you after that?
I mean, the thing is, there wasn't like a settlement date. Like it was very chaotic. It was me like losing a bunch of money and then trying to borrow more, thinking that, I fucked that up, but now I know what I'm doing. I'll make it back. And it was this sort of process of doing that alongside trying to figure out a backup, which was, if this really, really goes sour, like what else can I do? And that's where I started looking for potential jobs. But I didn't really have a resume, so the only thing I could get was knocking on doors on a commission basis. So you can't even call that a job because we weren't paid by hour. It wasn't a salary. It wasn't a wage. It was what they call on target earnings. In other words, you sell something, you get paid. You don't sell something, bad luck, pal. So I just started telling myself, I'm like, I've got to pay this. I had from one bank, I think I had to pay $1,000 a week in loans. The other bank like $600. Basically, I had to pay about $1,600 a week before I could eat. So that was a motivator, and I got off my ass and I went and started door knocking. And this is actually an interesting part of the story. Is I was always super introverted, like super introverted. My idea of a good night out was staying at home and reading a book. And imagine putting an introvert to tell them to go knock on doors and to sell pay television. And I didn't even have a television, so I had no idea what was on the TV. And it was just like I went and I taught myself. I studied some body language. I studied NLP, neuro linguistic programming. I studied like sort of communicating with human beings, psychology, and all this sort of stuff. And I took what I learned there and I applied it at the door. Learning how to build rapport with people, learning how to communicate with people, and all of this. And I quickly became one of the best salespeople in the country, selling pay television, for which I didn't have a TV. I didn't know what was on the channels, but what I learned was that sales and communication is about building relationships. And can you build relationships really quickly? Can you engage people and all this sort of stuff? And yeah, I guess to answer your original question, it was my thought pattern was I've got to dig my way out of this because I've got to eat. And then I just took steps towards making that a reality.
Do you think that sales experience, the door knocking, has helped you with future businesses?
Immensely. Like this was probably something I got from Rich Dad Poor Dad as well. As he talks about, Kiyosaki talks about that specifically in there. He did door knocking for a while, and he's like, every entrepreneur, every person who runs a business, they should go and do something like door knocking for a little while to experience what it's like to be told off, no, and all this sort of stuff multiple times. It helps you build some thick skin, but it also helps you learn to become a more effective communicator. And it definitely helped me. I think it also had some downside potentially because, sales is about, closing the deal, and then you sort of don't worry about the after sales stuff. And that probably has, that created a tendency for me in future to, to be more focused on getting the deal done, and then maybe fumbling later on, which is why as I've become more mature in business is, it's really important to have a team. So these days, for example, with Amber, myself and my partner in the business, Peter, he's like the yin to my yang, basically. So I go out, I raise the money, I lead the business, I lead the vision, I do all this sort of stuff. But Pete then can take all of that and put it in a process, in a system, in a set of procedures so that we actually execute and implement all of the stuff that I'm sort of promising on the front end. And that's probably one of the key lessons in business, that's taken me many years to learn, that I wish I had a mentor to learn, is that, whilst you can be a talented entrepreneur, like, the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobses and all that sort of stuff exist, but they can't exist in a vacuum. They can only succeed by having, the right people around them to execute in the areas that they're not as strong in. And that's sort of something I lacked very much in my first series of businesses, which, I got to a certain point of success, but I ended up, making mistakes down the track, which cost me because I just didn't have the right people around me.
Well, just to close off the door knocking one, how did you find that job initially, and then how did it end? When did you walk away from that?
It was the first couple of weeks was fine because I sort of you get that sort of learning phase and it's a novelty. And for many people, the first couple of weeks of door knocking are really hard because they basically earn nothing. They're too shy. But I had that sort of drive, so I was crazy. Like I would put 4 cans of tuna, so 2 cans in each pocket, and I would only allow myself to eat if I got a sale. And I would basically sprint between doors. If I got a sale, I'd sit down and eat. Like so I had this whole thing going, and so I was the first couple of weeks were fine, but then over time, like it started to eat away. Basically, I say it started to eat away at my soul because I was selling something I didn't believe in, I didn't care about. Like I was of the belief that nobody should be watching TV. I was like, everyone should set their TVs on fire because bullshit is a waste of time. People should be reading their books or something. And, it really took a toll on me over time. So after about 5 months, maybe 6 months, I was like, screw this, I'm leaving. So I left, started my own little sales company to sell some, I think it was phone plans at the time. Nothing I was passionate about, but I was trying to implement skills there. I sold a bunch of phone plans, and then the company that was selling for decided not to pay us. Hell, so then I had to go back to this guy that I was selling the pay television for. Did that for another 6 months, built up his whole company, and then sort of like the same thing happened. Like I just sort of felt like I was, selling my soul. And then I, round 2, set up another sales company of my own. This time we were doing some other stuff, like we were putting insulation in roofs, and we were selling stuff that, like just more trinkets and stuff like that at the door. So nothing that I was super passionate about, but nothing that I was against, right? So it wasn't like me selling TV, which I hated. And that was when I really started to dig out of it. And that's sort of what propelled me onto more an entrepreneurial career as opposed to anything else, because then it was mine.
Would you say that sales sort of saved you from the debt?
Very much so. I mean, the final digging out of the debt was actually in the company I set up after my sales company. So it was the renewable energies business. So we started installing solar panels, and I had a whole vertically integrated business. I was a supplier, installer, sales company. I had the whole thing set up, and that's really where I made my first quote unquote million. But yeah, like if it wasn't for the sales, I wouldn't have dug myself out. Not a chance. Like if I went and worked a job, there's would have taken me years to earn that money back.
So how did the phone plan one come about? Was that like a biz op?
Yeah, I found some guy who I'd met at some bloody personal development seminar or something like that, and he was running like a phone company. He had a contract with Optus, who is one of the large carriers in Australia. And yeah, we just sort of did a deal, but then he turned out to be a bit of a shady character and never paid us. So it was a short stint. It was like a month. And basically, I depleted what savings I had, and I was like, oh, crap, I got to go back to this other guy and sell some pay TV.
It was just in relation to what you learned from that experience of the guy not paying you for selling the phone plans, and whether or not you would say don't ever do affiliate stuff and only do your own business.
I was just overzealous, so I went in there and just started selling for the guy, and I didn't think about, like, I was young and stupid. I didn't think about contracts. I didn't think about any of that sort of stuff. So I went and did. I actually think it was a valuable experience in the sense that you learn to gauge what it's like. And I think also Kiyosaki says this in his book. It's this idea of go do some work without getting paid for it, because it'll teach you the value of doing good work. And I guess the nature of the game sometimes in business is if you can't handle sometimes not being paid, even if it's legitimate, or if you can't handle investing a bunch of money in doing something. Like I've had hospitality businesses, for example, in the past, where your upfront setup cost is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then you slave your ass off for a couple of years to try and make it work, and it turns out either the location was wrong or something, like and it becomes a waste. You end up spending a couple of years of your life and all of your life savings, and it collapses. It's a very sobering experience. So I guess it's not about like, should you run your own thing or should you affiliate market and all of that. It's you need to be comfortable with the reality that there will be times you'll just lose. And then you need to decide whether you want to spend your time trying to chase what you've lost, or setting to make money back end. And move on to the next thing. So what I generally did in life was, if I got ripped off or something like that happened, I kind of calculated in my mind, I'm like, okay, it'll take me X amount of months to sort of chase this guy just to get this back. Or if I put that X amount of months into generating new income or, doing something else, that'll be more profitable for me or more advantageous for me. So I always ended up going down that path because I've been ripped off in business many times. And I've rarely ever gone after people except when it made a lot of sense, or if I had a strong position, or if it was like a really principled thing. But yeah, I think each comes with its own risks. Like, the affiliate one comes with the risk that you don't get paid by the affiliate. The one that you do yourself comes with the risk that, all of the onus is on you, and maybe you're the one who doesn't pay yourself because you fucked up in your original calculations and you don't have enough money to pay yourself. So like, people sort of need to, like, running your own business is not some panacea. I think even for most people, actually, it's probably a bad idea. They should sort of work with someone else and help bring, the crazy entrepreneur's vision to life, because not everyone has that entrepreneurial sort of, I guess, seed. Some people are much better at assisting. And that's not to diminish their role. That just means that that's what they're better at. And combined with the entrepreneur, they can actually create something, because either of them on their own won't be able to, sort of thing. Yeah.
So you end up going back to door knocking. How did you get into solar panels from there?
So I did the door knocking again. Then I left that, and then we started selling, like, under my own company, a bunch of different things at houses. And I sort of realized that renewable energies were going to be important. The government was going to start getting involved. They were talking about giving money to consumers and all this sort of stuff. So I was like, okay, maybe we can apply our door knocking prowess to this. So I started selling for solar companies. So I brought them on as clients initially. And then after selling for them, I realized that a lot of them were incompetent in terms of the time it took them to install and all the sort of rigmarole and drama that went around that. So I was like, you know what, screw it. I'll find my own suppliers. I'll find my own installers, and I'll do the whole thing. I'll sell, I'll supply, and I'll install. And that sort of like that sort of grew. Like it wasn't the original plan, but it kind of grew out that way. And that's where I think I learned more about business in that sort of period than I had prior to that in anything else in my life, because everything else prior to that was just purely the sales. This was the whole supply chain, and that was sort of what I would consider my first real business, not just the sales company.
Well, that sort of comes back to the principle of solving problems for people as well, doesn't it? Because you've identified a problem and then you've basically gone out to solve it. And how did that go when you started doing your own thing?
I mean, that's when I started making money hand over fist. I mean, I was it was like there was some boom times in there, mate, honestly. Like I think at one stage I was a 23-year-old kid making 50, 60 grand of profit a week, more than what most people would make in a year. So I was doing really well. But that also ended up coming crashing down as well. Down towards the end of it was the government messed up the rebate scheme. They ran out of money towards the end of the rebate scheme, and then when it came time to pay out all the installers and all the companies that were that had done all these jobs up front, we all got 50 cents on the dollar. So we all got wiped out. Like even the biggest, longest standing solar company in Australia had been around for 20, 30 years. They went bankrupt overnight because the government ran out of money on the rebate. It was a disaster. So, and this again, it was not really a fault of ours, except maybe that, me and all these sort of other companies, we over leveraged in the sense that we anticipated getting X amount from the government along the way. But yeah, we all got obliterated in that. So, that was another, God knows how many years I spent building that business, only to walk away in the end with nothing. So, there's been trials and tribulations along the way, most definitely.
And what does that teach you, or what did that teach you about maybe doing business with the government?
I can say it in one sentence: never do business with the government. There is not on the planet, there does not exist a more competent pack of morons than government bureaucrats. And I don't say that just tongue in cheek, just to take the piss out of government bureaucrats. Like they are genuinely morons, but there's a reason why they're morons. Is that in the private sector, in the real world that you and I live in, when you and I make a good decision, we by and large get a good result, barring some bad luck. When we make a bad decision, there's a bad result. So it's like, if you're running a cafe and you make coffee, no one's going to buy your coffee. Like if you make good coffee, chances are more people are going to buy your coffee. In the government, it doesn't matter if you make a good decision or a bad decision, there is no consequence. Who ends up paying for it is the citizenry, and we pay for it through taxation or inflation. So it's a rigged game. And what that ends up attracting is the kind of morons who don't care about the ramifications of their decisions. And what you get is this sort of system of moral hazard. This is why I think all public systems are a disaster. And everywhere you look, all governments are bankrupt. They run a bankrupt institution. Like the actual concept of a nation state is a bankrupt institution. Show me one government that actually runs a surplus. Nobody. They're all bankrupt. They're all dependent on the fact that they can print money, which is actually a tax. It's a hidden tax on us. And they all borrow from the future, which is a tax on our children. And they tax us 50, 60, 70% of our money of what we earn. And they go and squander it on stupidity like art installation they want to put in, or, some stupid government scheme of wealth redistribution. So it's like the lesson I learned from there was a very healthy early distaste for government. And the more I've sort of gotten older and the more mature I've become, the more I've realized that those idiots are basically the parasite that, slows down progress worldwide, globally, for everyone. And it's just such a waste of time and energy. So yeah, that's definitely what I
learned. Not a fan of government then. No two ways about it.
Not a fan of government that has, I'm not a fan of a government that has the capacity to have a monopoly over the money. So like if you, for example, had much smaller governments that had to be run like corporations, what you would have between the citizenry and the government is a relationship that looks like a customer service provider relationship. But we don't have that. We have what's called an overlord and subject relationship. So like, for example, if you don't agree with the quality of the service that the government is providing, and you say, well, yeah, you know what? I don't want to pay my taxes anymore because I don't use your stupid public hospitals. I don't use this. I don't use that because it's all stupid. And you say, I don't want to pay for that anymore. In a normal commercial relationship, you just go and find another provider. In this relationship that we have with government, you get thrown in jail. It's like, wait a minute. Like, it's like, and people don't stop to think about that, which is why it's like, it drives me crazy. It's, you don't have an option. Competition is what enables the process of innovation. You can't have innovation without competition, and you can't have progress without innovation. Governments stand in the way of that because they do not allow anyone to compete within their jurisdiction on the most important thing, which is money and so-called public services. So this is, yeah, the world's heading in sort of like a bad direction with all of this because you've got governments just taking more and more of the pie, making more and more of the decisions. Like we've seen it in 2020, that they've gone and mandated every single reasonable, valid business to shut their doors and basically lose their livelihoods over what they deem is supposed to be the zombie apocalypse virus that's going to kill everyone. It's like, it's madness. So yeah, I'll leave that rant there, but I definitely do not agree with anything that the government does.
Well, I was going to say it segues almost nicely into Bitcoin, which is your new business, or I don't know whether it's new, maybe newish, called Amber. So I'd just love to know about how it came about in the first place, because if someone has like an idea for an app or something, it will often stay an idea. Whereas in your case, you've taken it from maybe an idea into a successful business. So I'd love to know about that.
Yeah, so I guess maybe this story should start with like the first app that I tried to build, which was many years ago now, probably 7-8 years ago. And what I tried to do then was sort of build a payroll automation app. And that was this thing where we, I had no idea what I was doing. I hired some developers from India to help me put this thing together. And I basically played the role of, for lack of a better term, product owner. And I had to define how the app was going to work, what it was going to do, what features it was going to have, what it was going to look like, wireframing, this and that, and all this sort of garbage. And basically spent 6 months with these guys building it and realizing that, having an idea for an app is one thing, building something that works is like a totally different thing. Like the amount of money we sunk into that, me and my friend, was ridiculous. And at the end of it, we basically didn't have an app that functioned very well. It kind of functioned. We got it integrated with Xero, but then it wasn't integrating with the banks that we wanted to sort of do the automatic payments out of. And it was just this sort of nightmare. And we ran out of money, basically. We were like, oh, well, that was a waste of $100,000. So we left that there. And then I kind of took that experience and then I went to build something else. And this one was sort of the first time I actually built it, in-house, where I hired developers, and it was, without getting into the whole story of iRecruit, but this was, I hired some people from, dude from Melbourne, another guy had just come in from France, a guy had come in from Egypt, from Philippines, and I basically put them all in my house. And we kind of, if you've ever seen the movie about Facebook where everyone's sort of working in the house, like we had that going in my apartment. And it was a mess. I mean, my girlfriend was on holidays in Brazil and she came back and she was like, who the fuck are all these people living in the house? I was like, don't mind them. We're building an app. She's like, what? It's just like there's 3 bedrooms and you got 8 people here. And I'm like, yeah, it'll be fine. We're going to raise some money. We'll be sweet. And that process, like we actually, went out, we put this pitch deck together. I remember my first pitch deck, was, I think, 89 slides. It was ridiculous. Like, we went and the first investors saw us. They're like, what the hell is this, War and Peace? Like, a pitch deck is supposed to be 10, 11 slides. So me and my friend at the time who were building this together, we went through all of that crap, basically trying to figure out, what this whole thing is about and how to do it. And we actually ended up putting together a piece of software. We got it on the App Store. We actually got some investment and all that sort of stuff. And we kind of turned it into a business. We got an office, we got some investors. I learned really trial by fire there. the long and short of that story is I towards the end of it had a dispute with the board about how the business should be run. They had different ideas about how it should be run, and I basically, quote unquote, got Steve Jobs out of the business. So they sort of pushed me out, and they had more votes on the board. Unlucky for them and for me, basically, is they ended up running the company into the ground and destroying it. So that was sort of 2015, 2016. And at that time, you know, I was, again, disillusioned. I was like, holy crap, I've been working my ass off for God knows how long, depleted all my savings. What now? And that's where Bitcoin came along. Is I was looking up some things. I was like, what am I going to get into? And I was thinking about, you know, what industries, what trends, what are going on. I was looking at, you know, additive manufacturing, so like 3D printing or Internet of Things, and then sort of came across Bitcoin, and I'm like, what the hell? And I'd come across Bitcoin years back when I was messing around with gold and silver, and I'd heard about it then. But I sort of brushed it off as internet funny money, whatever. I'll stick with my gold and silver because that's real money. But you know, here it is, like 4 years later, and it's still around. I was like, what the hell? And I started digging, and as I dug, I realized that there was something more here. It wasn't just some internet funny money. It was this sort of the reinvention of the core principles of money, but, you know, manifest in a way that actually delivers the three functions of money, which is store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account, in a way that is incorruptible, unconfiscatable, uninflatable, and unable to be co-opted by a single party. So in which case, there is no way for any individual, any organization, any institution, any nation to control the money. And I'd had some, you know, experience reading about, like, you know, Austrian economics and things like that, obviously prior to that. And so this started really aligning with me. And I'd done a lot of reading on anthropology and stuff, and sort of like how money emerged. Like people don't realize that humanity emerged through our capacity to abstract ideas and to cooperate based on abstract ideas. And the most important abstract idea is actually money, a mechanism via which we can exchange the product of our labor. So you can't have civilization without money. Money is the cornerstone of civilization. And as I discovered this, like, I realized that, holy shit, Bitcoin actually gives us something that is it is the closest possible mapping to what the meta idea of money is, which is a representation of the value your time and energy has input into society. That's what money is as a meta idea. And because you can't print time, you can't print energy, you shouldn't be able to print money. Money should be a fixed constant, just like time and energy, or just like, you know, the speed of light is, like, in a physics sense. And the more I discover this, the more I realize that there's something important here. So, you know, I started running around telling everyone to buy Bitcoin, and I'd get these strange looks like, huh? Well, what is this? Where do I buy it? How do I buy it? How much do I buy? And I kind of got sick and tired of getting, you know, asked the same questions over and over again. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to fucking build an app here. Like, I've got sort of experience. I've done this a couple of times. I, you know, more or less know what to do. So I reached out to a few people, you know, found some initial developers, and, you know, we started putting this app together. Found some, you know, early seed investors. I put some money in myself, and, you know, we formed up a little team. We sort of built the first version. The original name of Amber was actually Stash, and the idea was to sort of like stash some money into Bitcoin. Yeah, but that sort of changed. We wanted to come up with a name that had, you know, more longevity and things like that. So yeah, the first year, like, I think we incorporated the company in early 2018. And then, you know, the first year was quite tumultuous. You know, being a non-tech founder, like, I understood enough about building a software company, but I wasn't a coder. So one of the guys who I had on the team was supposedly our CTO. He was, how can I put it? He was a really good talker, but did nothing, and basically, you know, twisted us for many, many months, you know, telling us he was doing this, but, you know, wasn't really producing anything. And he was at home most of the time because he had a broken ankle or something, saying that he was working, but actually, you know, playing video games. So, it took us a while, but we got rid of him. I found some new developers, and we sort of put this whole thing together. And in 2019 is when I say we really started the business. At that point, we'd raised a little bit more money. I put the team together, and that's in sort of April of that year, I believe. I found Pete, who I mentioned before, the Into My Yang. He came into the business, really helped transform it. And since then, 2019, we grew the company further. We raised a little bit more money in 2019. And then 2020, we sort of had a near-death experience around, the whole lockdown Corona time, because we were raising some money and we just made it. Like we're sort of getting really close to the end of our runway, but we closed the deal, I think, a couple of days before all the Corona stuff happened, all the lockdowns happened. We got some money in just in time. And that sort of saved the business, allowed us to sort of continue building up the revenue and things like that. And yeah, this year, with Bitcoin starting to pick up again on the uptrend, our volumes have picked up, and we're officially now, I guess, moving beyond the startup phase, because we're about break even on a monthly basis. So that's kind of the story of how I got into the software space, and then how I got into Bitcoin, and how Amber exists today.
It is a
warts and all.
an amazing story. I mean, before we sort of summarize it, I would like to ask,
thanks,
how many businesses do you think you've got left in you?
Look, after this, so for me, I want to build this up over the next couple of years, and my goal is to help, ideally 250,000 people move out of fiat into Bitcoin. That's sort of my overarching goal. After this, I will want to get out of business for a little while. I want to, sit down and just write some books. There's a series of books that I want to write, sort of that are, look at life from a philosophical and economic, praxeological standpoint. So I want to spend some time doing some research and some writing. After that, though, who knows? Maybe I'll do something again. I think what I'll do in the future is, people think I'm crazy, but I believe that the old financial system is collapsing, and alongside the old financial system, the idea of the nation state starts to fall over. There's a brilliant book which I recommend everyone read, called Sovereign Individual, that was written in late 90s, and it basically predicted everything from YouTube to Facebook to Twitter to Bitcoin. Like, these guys were so on point about how the information age would start to transform society. Like, there's never been anybody as on point as these guys. And one of the things they talk about in there is the diminishing power of the nation state, and the fact that as the nation state loses its capacity to hold onto a monopoly on the production of money, it starts to die off, because it gets less and less efficient. It resorts to more and more taxation, like all this sort of stuff. So my belief is that, in the coming decades, we're going to see the rise of what I like to think of as private cities. And basically these cities, will be governed and run on their own rules, and that they won't function like, governments do today, where they can just print their own money and tax their individuals. It'll probably function more like a membership, which is, here's a city, you have a contractual relationship with the city, you pay a fixed fee per annum, and you get your basic services, which is, policing and, I don't know, judicial system. Everything else, you either pay for directly a la carte, or you buy an insurance or a membership plan or something like that. And we sort of move towards a world where we have, like I said earlier, is the customer service provider relationship. Now, that doesn't scale to large populations. So I think the only way for humanity to survive in the long term is if we have hundreds of thousands or millions of these cities that all sort of, function on their own governance systems. And people free to move between them and do whatever they want. But I genuinely think that Bitcoin is the thing that enables this, because it breaks the capacity for large-scale nation states to exist by removing their ability to print money. So my probably business after I'm gonna spend a few years writing is probably going to be looking at building one of these private cities, or maybe a series of them, or helping put together an idea around, or a framework around building private cities.
Well, I would support you in any creative capacity for what it's worth. But I think based on your innate problem solving approach, I think you'll probably see some other problem you want to solve and start another business, which is, you know, I can picture you as like a shark on Shark Tank or something with a massive portfolio of businesses. I think the story is amazing.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. It's who knows? I guess who knows what the future holds. I guess, you know, there's that famous saying, it's like, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan. And, you know, I've experienced that in many ways in my life. It's, you know, the amount of detours I've had to take, which at the time have seemed, you know, a disaster. But, you know, like iRecruit was a perfect example, actually. If it hadn't been for me, you know, getting pushed out of that company, which at the time I thought was the most devastating thing ever, I would not have, you know, stumbled back on Bitcoin. And, you know, Bitcoin's honestly the thing that I'm most passionate about in my life now. Like, this next chapter of my life is about that. I don't think there's anything more important happening in the world today. And yeah, like, you know, one door closes and another opens.
I think the Bitcoin thing is very much in line with what your passion is. So I can see you definitely getting engaged with that, or in the long term, if you like.
Yeah, indeed.
But thank you very much for coming and telling your story.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's been lovely to meet you, and I'd love to hear about what you're up to. So you know, let me know as things happen.
Yeah, let's maybe always, you know, make the offer with each podcast I'm on, like, sort of catch up in a year from now and just sort of see how things are going. So let's catch up a year from now. I mean, you know, at the pace the world's changing right now, God knows what, you know, what kind of insanity we're going to be living in a year from now. But it'd be great to catch up. So please keep me in mind. Would love to have a follow-up conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Amazing.
Aleks, where's the best place for people to find you?
If they just search my surname, Svetski, Svetski, on Google, they'll be able to find a series of places. But basically, I make some Clubhouse appearances, and my handle there is just @Svetski. Or my Twitter is usually where I'm most vocal, is just Aleks Svetski, and my Aleks is spelled a little bit different, Aleks, then Svetski, Svetski. Or my Medium is another good place, and Medium is where I do all my writing, and that's just svetsky.medium.com. So it's all sort of around either Svetski or Aleks Svetski, and you'll find all of my stuff there. You know, I recommend sort of, you know, Twitter is where I'm a little bit, you know, more abrasive, which you sort of get with 160 or 320 characters, whatever it is these days. But you know, there's definitely some good material in the blog for people to think about, not only Bitcoin, but just, you know, the broader implications of how society functions, and, you know, how you can potentially live a better life.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Thanks for coming on, and I'll speak to you in a year.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Look after yourself, buddy.
Bye.